do my job. I ride the bus, roll up my sleeves with the hoi polloi. But at night, I live a life of exhilaration.
Of missed heartbeats and adrenaline.
And, if the truth be known,
a life of dubious virtue.
I won't deny I've been engaged in violence, even indulged in it.
I've maimed and killed adversaries, and not merely in self-defence.
I've exhibited disregard for life,
limb
and property.
And savoured every moment.
You may not think it to look at me,
but I have commanded armies
and conquered worlds.
And though in achieving these things,
I have set morality aside,
I have no regrets.
For though I've led a double life, at least I can say
I've lived.
Hello and welcome to Replay Retro. I'm Matt, and on this episode we'll be taking a look at a system that took video games out of the niche and into the mainstream as we welcome the PlayStation to its 20th anniversary year. With the PlayStation 4 taking an early lead in the 8th generation, it's hard to imagine a time before Sony consoles. But at the dawn of the 90s, the market was dominated by the Sega Mega Drive and the brand new Super Nintendo, with NEC bringing up the rear with the TurboGrafx 16. Also around this time, Sony and Philips had been working together on a new multimedia CD format, and indeed NEC had already released a CD attachment for their console in a bid to take the lead. Then in '91, Sega released their own add-on CD unit, and a slew of full-motion video-based games followed, including the cult classic Night Trap. Not wanting to get left behind, Nintendo decided they too needed a CD attachment, and decided that since Sony had designed the Mega CD for Sega, it was only logical to get Sony's help with their own system. Nintendo already had a way into Sony through designer Ken Kutaragi, who had created the SPC 700 sound chip used by the Super Nintendo. In fact, Kutaragi was almost fired from Sony for doing this, until their CEO spotted the potential in a working relationship with Nintendo. Sony and Nintendo quickly reached a deal whereby Sony would create the new CD hardware, and in exchange would be allowed to produce their own Super Nintendo Super CD hybrid console, much as Sharp had done with the Twin Famicom a few years before. As part of the deal, Sony would also be entitled to share in the profits from any Super CD games. With the basis of the deal worked out, Sony proudly stood on stage on the first day of the 1991 Consumer Electronics Show and announced the new hardware to the masses, who were understandably excited at the prospect of the already impressive Super Nintendo taking a big step forward and getting CD-based games. However, unbeknownst to Sony, Nintendo were getting cold feet. They were uncomfortable sharing the profits of their biggest franchises, and worse still, they had heard rumours that Sony were becoming interested in one day entering the video game market themselves with their own hardware, and were worried that their knowledge of the Mega Drive and now the Super Nintendo would be powerful weapons. At the 11th hour, a delegation from Nintendo had entered into secret discussion with Philips, and on the second day of the Consumer Electronics Show, Nintendo announced that yes, there was CD hardware coming to the SNES, but it would be Philips and not Sony who they were partnering with. Sony were furious. The consumer electronics giant had been made to look stupid by Nintendo, and all their hard work in the development of this system was wasted. Many of the company's senior staff thought they should just cut their losses and walk away, citing the increasingly crowded video games market and a lack of interest in producing what they saw as kids' toys. But Kutaragi made a powerful speech to CEO Norio Oga, where he said the company should not accept this loss of face and instead should seek revenge against Nintendo. Oga agreed, and work continued on the project, with Sony producing a few prototypes of the hybrid console before deciding to create their own system from the ground up. By 1994, Atari had released the 32-bit Jaguar and its own CD-based add-on from Philips. Panasonic had released the first 3DO console, and Sega had released the CD-based Saturn, while Nintendo was still stuck with cartridges on the Super Nintendo, with no sign of their CD attachment. In fact, the only thing that seemed to have come from their deal with Philips was a few weak Mario and Zelda games on the CDI. Nintendo then announced that they had scrapped their CD attachment based on the performance of the Mega CD and other CD-based consoles, and in fact they'd be skipping the 32-bit generation altogether by releasing a new 64-bit console the following year. But at the end of '94, Sony released their revenge. Retailing for just under £300 or $300, the PlayStation was significantly cheaper than Sega's Saturn, and the console specifications were so impressive that Sega felt threatened. The system's 34 MHz processor was used for impressive 3D graphics and was capable of rendering 360,000 polygons a second, while its GPU took care of all the 2D work. It may not have had the RAM of the Saturn, which was clearly more capable in the 2D world, but when it came to 3D, the PlayStation utterly dominated the competition, with arcade veterans Namco demoing an impressive port of their popular Ridge Racer cabinet, while Sega struggled to even get Daytona running on the Saturn. The PlayStation also featured incredible 24-channel sound, and could really show that off thanks to its ability to play music CDs. Early versions of the system, now known as audiophile versions, even included connections on the back to allow the system to be connected to your hi-fi if you didn't already have a CD player, and this is a tactic that Sony have continued to use. The PlayStation 2 was an early DVD player, and the PlayStation 3 was released as the cheapest Blu-ray player of the time. However, seeing the failures of the CDI and 3DO, Sony were careful not to market the PlayStation as an all-in-one media centre, instead choosing to focus on the games. And to back this up, they brought in major talent from the software development world, including buying Psygnosis, the company responsible for Lemmings, who would go on to produce the insanely popular Wipeout racing series. By the time the worldwide launch was complete in 1995, the PlayStation had an impressive lineup of titles across a wide variety of genres, including air combat and the colourful platformer Rayman. Meanwhile, the Nintendo 64 had been delayed and pushed back into 1996, giving Sony a whole year's head start to build up their reputation and create their own franchises to combat the popular Nintendo characters. By now, it seemed the PlayStation was utterly unstoppable. But before we examine what happened next, let's take a look at the hardware itself and just a few of the games. Here we are then with both versions of the PlayStation hardware and the boxes that they came in. We'll look first at the original big grey flagstone type system. And it's instantly recognisable. It may be a very simple shape, but it's a very recognisable shape with that big disc tray in the middle and these two larger protruding areas at the sides. On top, you have the reset button, the power button, and the eject button for the disk drive. Inside you can see the disk mechanism and the usual warnings that you would expect on a CD tray. Back here you can see the button. You can just see that needs to be pressed down for the system to believe that the door is shut. And that's where, if you were using, say, a mod cartridge or boot disk, you'd have to have a little spring here to trick the machine into thinking that the door was closed, even when it wasn't, so that you could swap the discs and put your copied game in. Not that any of us would do that, of course. On the front here, you have your two controller ports. A unique type of controller not seen anywhere outside of the PlayStation. And you also have your memory card slots there to allow you to save games. We'll take a look at memory cards and controllers in just a moment. Around the sides, not really anything to see. This side is vented, you can just about see into the machine. On the back here, you'll see that this is a later version of the console, so the only things you'll find on the back are the serial connector for connecting to another console, the AV multi-out for connecting to your television. Again, this is a port that isn't seen on anything else and was used for both the RF connector and the SCART connector. And of course, a power socket. It's a very standard kettle type power socket, which is great because it means if you have lost the cable or you buy a PlayStation that doesn't have the cable, it's really easy to replace it. Very cheap to replace. Later systems, as you'll see in the video a little bit later, had extra ports. There's a parallel port here. You had the audiophile ports here, but we'll take a look at those in just a while. Underneath then we have more venting, some little feet, non-slip feet for it to stand on, and of course all the usual information you'd expect to find about a Class 1 laser product, serial numbers, version numbers, so you can see this is SCPH 9002, which is quite a late version in the console's lifespan, power information, and pretty much just what you'd expect to find. Looking over here at the Slim version, this is the PS1, the Slim, you can see, just by putting them next on top of each other there, that the PS1 is far thinner and far smaller. We're not just talking a small slim down operation here. The little PS1 is absolutely tiny compared to the original PlayStation. On top, see the reset button has been lost and combined in with the power button, because obviously a power button and a reset button pretty much do the same thing. You've also got your eject button here, and this time, in absence of the button being there, it's been put just here, a little catch, in an effort to try and stop CD piracy. However, as you can see from mine here, a little sticker in place will do the job. The CD mechanism has had its side switched, but the usual warning is there. The front then, the controller ports, still pretty much the same, as are the memory card ports. Sides, just as boring as their older brother. And on the back, the final level of stripping down has happened. You now only have a power socket, which this time does not use the kettle lead and instead uses a similar lead to that of the PSP. And again, you only have the multi-AV out. So you'll notice that the serial connector has been dropped here, meaning that you cannot link a PS1 to another PlayStation console. And once again, lots of information about the guarantee, model number SCPH 102, serial numbers, warnings, and, well, that's all the patents that were pending at the time for this machine. But other than that, just some venting, some more non-slip feet, and that's your lot. The memory cards are nice and simple, just looking like this. There is, I believe, is it 1 meg of storage on these cards? I could be wrong there. I think it's 1 megabyte of storage, and it would be to allow you to save games and any game-related data, such as created characters. And they would just slot into the top of the machine there, just above the controller port. The first generation controllers look like this. You get plenty of cable. The PlayStation controllers were never short on cable. You do get a really good amount. You can see the controllers are very similar. You have your simple D-pad there, 4 buttons, start and select, and you have L1, R1 as well as L2, R2. So basically the only difference in terms of buttons between these and the Super Nintendo controllers is the addition of the extra bumper buttons there. Other than that, the configuration is pretty much the same. They do fit into your hand though very nicely with these prongs coming down that sit into your palms. They are a very comfortable controller. You can tell that Sony put quite a lot of thought into making sure that they would be comfortable in the hand. Later, these were replaced with the DualShock analog controller, which features 2 analog sticks. You also have an extra button here for enabling and disabling the analog function, depending on what you want. You've still got loads of cable, and you'll also notice that those secondary bumper buttons have started to change into trigger buttons, which is what you would see today on the PS4. So they're well on their way towards changing to be triggers, but they're not quite there yet. At this point, they're definitely not analog, they're still just push buttons. The games obviously come on CD, you didn't need to know that, and they come in these pretty standard plastic cases. It's essentially a thicker version of a CD dual case with the PlayStation logo embossed there and a hologram there. Inside you find your instruction manual, and obviously the disc would be there. And all the usual details you'd expect about the game on the back. Nothing overly exciting. They do look similar to Dreamcast cases, which we all know are very brittle, yet these can take a little bit more abuse before they break. Not very much, because obviously there is a lot of air between the two covers, and they will snap and crack very easily, but they are a little bit more hard-wearing than the Dreamcast ones. It tends to be more the hinges that I find go on these. And obviously, when you're ready to play World's Scariest Police Chases, you just take it out of the box, pop it into the disk drive on either your big PlayStation or your little baby PlayStation, plug in your controller, and you'd be ready to play World's Scariest Police Chases on the PlayStation. So the mode I've selected here for World's Scariest Police Chases is Free Patrol, where essentially you pick one of these cars and go out on patrol looking to bust crims, yo. We'll take the standard police cruiser. Obviously, graphically, yeah, it's not perfect by today's standards, you know. This is very clearly a block with wheels. But for the time, it's an impressive... Oh, we've already got a suspect. Let's take him down! Oops. Probably not going to help with our crim catching. Get out of the way, people! Where did that crim go, yo? There he is. You can see at the bottom his stress bar is the blue bar. There you go. And if you hit him, he'll also get a red bar, which is his damage bar. Obviously, if you max out the stress or the damage bar, then you will stop the crim. There are also missions in this game where you have to, you know, obviously stop certain situations. I believe there's a mad bomber at one point that you have to stop. There's also a stolen bus that you have to stop at some point. Come here, Crim! T-bone! Oh no, pit maneuver. You don't see that on World's Scariest Police Chases. The cop doing the T-bone has a crash. As you get further through the free patrol, the criminals do get more difficult to stop using just stress, and you will have to use your pit maneuvers and such like. I remember when this game came out, it was absolutely brilliant. I was obsessed with this game. I played it non-stop for ages. Not just this free patrol mode, obviously, I did play the missions as well. I remember it being advertised as cars will actually get out of your way and respond to the siren. And that was a feature at the time, believe it or not. That was seen as an impressive achievement. Where did that crim go? There he is! Stop, crim! Do I have a gun at this point? Oh no, that's a civilian. You do get guns later in the game. You may even have them now, and I just don't know how to... Aha, there you go, guns! Yeah! Gun! Move! Non-crim! I've got someone that needs to be shot. There you go, he's moved out of my way. Come on, shoot the crim. No, not that car. You can lock on to various cars. What happens if you shoot a civilian? Ah, they crash. Probably going to lose my police badge for that. Come on, catch this damn crim. Let's put a bullet in his face. God. You do get better guns as well. It's not just a pistol all the way through the game. Damn those indestructible lampposts. Come on. Catch the crim. I just want to stop this one guy by shooting him. Yeah! Take that! You can see that I am locked onto him now. I can fire at will. Die! I'll teach you for going through a red light. Shoot you in the face. So yeah, that is World's Scariest Police Chases. And I've nearly destroyed this car. Let's take a look at another game. Next up then, we have HBO Boxing. I bet you can tell what HBO Boxing's about. Let's just pick our characters. Choose our venue. This was actually one of the first games I think I got on my slim PlayStation. Okay, let's fight. These load times are obviously the downside of having a CD-based console. You have to stare at a scary face for a long time with a moving bar. Still staring at the scary face. Yay!
Hello, I'm Jim Lampley.
As you can see, the character models aren't that bad, really. Considering this is a 2 generations old console. 3 generations old now. 3 generations old. And it's, you know, the character models are recognisable as what they are.
There is a 2-minute round length.
Let's skip into the fight, see if I can remember how to do this. Smash his face in. Ah, no. Oh, what? I'm dizzy already? I got punched once.
A punishing hook to the head.
Nah, I do not remember the controls at all.
A super cross there.
Ah, of course. Press L1 to switch your fist. Now, yeah, got you now. Different buttons are obviously different punches. You also have a block, and you can switch fist, which is why one of my fists is glowing and the other one isn't. You'd think the other fighter would know which one I was about to hit him with, based on the fact that it's glowing.
That punch was partially blocked. That punch hit him square on the cheek.
Wow. Yeah, while today's standards, this may not... Oh, look, I've got a cut nose now. By today's standards, this obviously isn't a massively realistic game. It's very obvious that these aren't real people. But, for the time, this was pretty cutting edge. Oh, apparently I'm ready to quit. Better back off for the rest of the...
Solid left hand.
Oh, is that it? Technical knockout. Technical knockout in the first round. What a shocking way to lose. Look at him doing his little dance. So yeah, it's not a bad game. For a 3 generations old console, it's a pretty good looking game. And it's worlds ahead of the Super Nintendo. Worlds ahead of the Saturn, really, in terms of there's less polygoning. It really did set the benchmark for this whole generation of consoles. So let's take a look at one last game. Now then, a game that should be instantly recognisable to everyone. It's Crash Bandicoot. A brilliant platformer that, again, was miles ahead of anything else. Miles ahead of anything the Saturn could do, as far as I'm concerned. Just this depth alone was something fairly new. And this is going to sound like blasphemy, but I think, personally, this is a better looking game than Super Mario 64. I know, that's kind of a difficult thing to say, but I think Super Mario 64 is a bit more blocky than this. And I don't think the depth is as good in Super Mario 64. Crash Bandicoot was sort of the edgy mascot for the PlayStation, like Sonic had been for Sega. There we go, and that's that level finished. A great looking platformer that I think set the benchmark. Well, is it really a platformer, a 3D game? I think you get the idea. It definitely set the benchmark for its genre as far as I'm concerned. Fantastic game. Let's take a look at one more level. It is a stunningly good game. It's fast-paced like Sonic 2, so while Crash definitely had his attitude, the game also lived up to the speed. Ah, come here! Man, I'm going to be pretty much invincible throughout if I keep all this up. Woo! Yeah, I know you're impressed. Why are they on there? Weird. So yeah, that was Crash Bandicoot by Naughty Dog on the PlayStation. By the time the N64 started to hit shelves in the middle of 1996, PlayStation games were coming thick and fast. Games like Tomb Raider and Resident Evil called the system home, while the Nintendo system launched with just 2 titles. And by the time they started bringing out the big guns, developers were already able to push the PlayStation further with games like Metal Gear Solid and sequels to the earlier titles establishing franchises and characters that today feel like they've always been part of the landscape. Worse still for Nintendo, one of their biggest gaming franchises abandoned them right when they needed help most, as Square took Final Fantasy VII away from them to produce it for PlayStation instead, purely because the CD format would allow them to fit more content in and make the game bigger than any previous Final Fantasy game, something which the cartridges of the N64 just couldn't make possible. Around the same time, the PlayStation control pads were also upgraded, bringing dual analog sticks similar to the one made popular by the N64, as well as force feedback inspired by the rumble packs introduced by Nintendo for Lilac Wars, keeping the PlayStation ahead of Nintendo's struggling console at every turn. However, the road wasn't trouble-free for Sony, as the system had a number of faults, including an annoying ticking sound caused by overheating, which could be solved, rather weirdly, by turning the console upside down, as well as faulty laser units in early systems, which would wear out and ended up costing the company significant money after the courts ruled they could not just expect consumers to buy a new unit when the original was defective in the first place. However, these problems were addressed in later hardware revisions. A bigger problem came when the anti-piracy system built into the console was eventually defeated by the use of mod chips, which could be soldered into the console, allowing people to play copied games exactly as Nintendo feared could happen if they had chosen to use the CD format. Even easier methods of circumventing the protection system included cartridges which plugged into the mostly pointless parallel port on earlier consoles, and even boot discs, which could be bought cheaply from market sellers who also sold the copied games. These would use springs or stickers to trick the console into believing the CD was closed. A black PlayStation, called the Net Yaruzi, which is Japanese for Let's Do It Together, later came out bundled with tools and manuals for creating your own software, helping aspiring developers and hobbyists to create their own games without the enormous expense of a full development suite. And unlike previous versions, this console featured no copy protection at all, making it extremely desirable until mod chips and other piracy tools became widely available. Over the course of its life, the system also went through a number of cost-cutting redesigns, mostly involving stripping down the number of ports at the back of the console, which allowed Sony to reduce the price, bringing the system more in line with that of the N64, putting even more pressure on Nintendo. Not even the arrival of the Dreamcast in 1999 managed to kill off the PlayStation, as rumours of the approaching PlayStation 2 had gamers everywhere so excited that they were willing to wait and save their money a whole extra year. Just before the PS2 arrived, Sony released one final version of the PlayStation in the form of the slimmed-down PS1. This smaller console boasted a level of portability, and accessories included a 5-inch LCD screen, battery packs, and a car adapter, making it very popular with parents looking to keep their children occupied on long journeys. By the time the dust settled and a new generation of consoles had taken over the fight, the PlayStation was without question the absolute winner of the 5th generation console war, selling 102 million units before being discontinued in 2006, while the N64 could only muster 33 million and the Saturn just 10 million. But more than this, the PlayStation had introduced the world to more in-depth storylines, games on a much bigger scale, and games targeted at adults. They weren't toys anymore. Video games were now well on their way to challenging Hollywood for domination of the entertainment industry. Video games were cooler, budgets were higher, and it's fair to say that gaming wouldn't be where it is today without PlayStation. Weird then, that it could all have been a different story, if not for Nintendo's betrayal. It's impossible to imagine just where the industry might be if not for the events of the '91 Consumer Electronics Show. Nintendo may well have gone on to lead the console war for years to come. Perhaps Sega's Dreamcast would have been a success without the PS2 blocking its path. Maybe Microsoft would have stayed out. Maybe the Wii would never have brought us motion gaming. And maybe we wouldn't be able to enjoy the gaming powerhouses of this 8th generation. That's all we've got time for on today's show, but make sure you join us next time for another look back at gaming history. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and be sure to check out our new Facebook page. Thanks for watching.